Reading with your kids.
Hey. My name's Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We're coming to you from the beautiful Encompass Health campus in beautiful Braintree, Massachusetts. We're so excited and so very honored that you join us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show, the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher Radio, wherever you get your podcasts. Our best today is Ben Gundersheimer. He is also known as Mr. G, and he is here to celebrate his brand new book. It's called How Many Squirrels Are in the World? Join us right now from the beautiful state of Massachusetts. Our guest is here today to celebrate his brand new picture book. The book is called How Many Squirrels Are in the World? Please welcome to the show Grammy Award-winning musician, an author. He's known on stage as Mr. G. Please welcome to the show Ben Gundersheimer. Hey, Ben, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me, Jed.
I'm excited to have you here. Anytime we have a neighbor from Massachusetts on, I just absolutely love it.
Nice. Well, yeah, I feel the brotherhood for sure.
There you go. And so you've won a Latin Grammy Award. We're going to talk about that in a little while. How many squirrels are in the world? I love that idea. My wife would say, in something that she had to ask for many mornings a couple of years ago, is how many squirrels am I going to find in my engine eating my wires?
I get it. Yeah, they appear in all sorts of unusual places.
They do. So tell us about this book.
Well, How Many Squirrels Are in the World, like all my books, is based on an original song, and it's a song on the first Mr. G album. I now have 12, so it's been a sort of a fan favorite with kids and families and teachers as sort of a counting song. I'll play a little of it for you later, but for years. But it's my third children's picture book. And just thrilled that it's coming out now. The illustrator is a longtime collaborator. His name is Marcos Almada Rivero. He's a phenomenal artist from Mexico. And Marcos actually illustrated my first book called Señorita Mariposa, which is a bilingual book about the monarch butterfly migration. So we're thrilled to have this one out now.
That's so, you mentioned monarch butterflies. I was like amazed that these teeny little creatures are able to fly from Massachusetts and even further north all the way down to Mexico. And they don't have any GPS. Well, they obviously have some kind of GPS, but it ain't anything that we're familiar with.
Absolutely. No, I mean, that it's one of the most remarkable phenomena in nature that I'm familiar with. As you said, they undertake this extraordinary migration, 3,000 miles in some cases from Canada right through our backyard in Massachusetts to the mountains of Michoacan in Mexico, to this very specific mountain range. Actually, before the pandemic, I went to Mexico with Marcos, and there's a fabulous documentary film on our website of us observing the monarch butterflies in the mountains of Michoacan.
That's awesome. Yeah. So was there something, my wife wouldn't have been able to write a children's book based on her experience with squirrels. It wouldn't be appropriate. But was there something in particular that inspired How Many Squirrels Are in the World?
Well, it may have to do with the fact that just in general, I've always been sort of fascinated with the natural world. And a lot of my songs and stories are inspired by that, just observing nature, whether it's the monarch butterfly in my backyard and then learning that it undertakes this migration. But in truth, I had a dog when I was a kid growing up in Philadelphia, and in theory, she was the family dog, but I was the one who really bonded with the dog and thus walked her all the time. And she was very much engaged with our local squirrel population, really curious about it. So early childhood memories of being like 4 or 5 years old, like dragged down the street as she took off after a squirrel. So I probably by extension took an interest in the squirrels that were, and this is part of the thing that's fun about squirrels is they're everywhere. And even in urban settings like what I grew up in, there's squirrels all over the place. There was actually a fun article in the New York Times not long ago about a squirrel census that they undertook in Central Park. So whether you're out in the woods where I live now, squirrels everywhere in the forest, or in the middle of the city, you can find them.
Yeah, yeah. We've hosted international kids here in our home, and I remember one year we had some young women from Japan celebrating Thanksgiving while they were studying in Boston with us, and they were just amazed by the squirrels. They were just fascinated, and I'm like, there's like a million out there. You want to take some home, be my guest. But I think we forget, we take for granted a lot of the nature that's around us.
Absolutely. And, I know a lot of your work with this podcast is about, trying to engage families together. And to me, having just mentioned this sort of the humorous origins of the book, a larger sort of mission behind the scenes is just like with reading with kids and bringing families together is this notion that these days, so many people are just on their screen all the time. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I'll go out to a restaurant and I'll see everyone in the family on their own device, which I find a bit depressing. Mm-hmm. So the notion of getting out as a family and taking an interest in our surroundings, and observing the natural world, that's like nature to me, like that's the best show on earth. And so as a way for families to gather, to just walk out their door, you're going to see something. It might be a squirrel, it might be a bird, but like that's, and trying to count it up. And, that component, I mean, this is a counting book for younger kids, but in a more macro sense, in terms of the work that I do, I really want, humans, let's call them in this case families, to just take more of an appreciation and observation of the natural world, because I just feel like we can't protect anything we don't value. Mm-hmm. And also to realize that we're just part of all of us, just a larger ecosystem. We're sharing the planet with the squirrels and with the butterflies, et cetera. So,
yeah. I know myself, when I have traveled and explored Central America, there was very little times when I was on my screen, because there was so many different things, especially when we were out in the rainforest, and I had the same experience. I was seeing all these creatures that were exotic to me, and the people, around me from Costa Rica or Panama are just like, we got a bazillion of those. But it was like, it was unique, and it was something that I really wanted to connect with.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think with a book like this, I think the point you just made is so spot on. Like when we're in a different culture, and I've been fortunate to travel and perform a lot in Latin America, but also in Europe and India. When I'm in these places that are so far from home, everything's inspiring and fascinating. And the last thing you want to do is, for me, and obviously you too, is like be on the screen when the world outside is so fascinating. When we're home, as you said, we all fall into our sort of, call it ruts of normalcy, where we just become sort of inured to the world around us. But in fact, if we think about kids, everything's new for the kids, and so talking about a 3 or 4 or 5-year-old, like the squirrels are fascinating, as are all stimuli. And so trying to retain, I think this is another thing that I care a lot about with my work, is like trying and to retain sort of like a childlike sense of wonder and engage kids where they are. Another thing with squirrels is like they're on eye level, they're zipping around. It's just, that's fun for kids. And so to try to, with me, I'm always trying to like find an entry point and the music is really helpful, like make it catchy, make it fun. So it's not like a lesson per se. It's just like what I find, like when learning really is transparent if people are having fun, whether they're kids or adults. And so the notion of trying to count all the squirrels in the world, of course, that's sort of ludicrous, but it's like a fun endeavor. And in the book, the way Marcos, the illustrator, did it, he's so brilliant. It's just like this little girl with her dog, and she's really determined to count the squirrels in her neighborhood. So it's just like a cute quest of a kid, of like a little citizen scientist, like really serious about getting to the bottom of that eternal question.
Well, you've mentioned a couple of times your music, and that this book was inspired by your song of the same, I'm guessing the same title. Yep. Can you give us a little bit of that?
Sure. So I'll just give you the chorus. It goes like this. How many squirrels
are in the world? How many squirrels are in the world? I'm looking high, I'm looking low, I'm counting squirrels everywhere I go. That kind of thing.
All right. Yeah. I love that. Hey, you mentioned you've had a chance to perform all over the world. I haven't had a chance to perform all over the world, but I have had a chance to perform all over the country in Puerto Rico, and I've noticed a difference in the different places I've gone to. We recently had Enrique Moras, who is the publisher of Syncretic Press, who brings books published in Latin America here to the United States. And we talked about the different differences in books that are published for the Latin American audience and how they differ from books that are published here. What kind of differences do you find in either music for kids that's produced in Latin America or different places around the world, or just in the audiences?
It's a great question. And one of the things that's been really fascinating for me I'll talk about it in the third person for a second, because prior to beginning the Mr. G project, I had a long career as a singer-songwriter for grown-ups, and was in bands and performed solo. Did all kinds of stuff with that. And I noticed wildly different responses in different cultures and communities. In the Mr. G project, what's been fascinating is, there's this cliche, and I can speak much more to music with this than the books, because with the while we do book events on tour, I've been doing the music much longer. And that cliche of how music is the universal language, I've really found that to be true in really fascinating ways, unlike any other project that I've been involved with music. And I'm talking about like whether performing in the middle of Chicago or Miami or LA, not to mention in Guatemala or Mexico or Colombia. In those countries, that's wonderful because we're singing in Spanish. Mm-hmm. A lot of my music is bilingual, Spanish, English. And so I think there's some exoticism there when I show up in, Panama and I'm singing in Spanish as an American guy. That said, we've also performed in India. I don't speak the language, and so it's much more, at that point, it's just conveying energy, and rhythm and sort of a shared humanity and way of, and a desire to connect sort of across cultures beyond borders. And that's really important to me. And with the books, one of the things that's been, I have 4 children's books out now based on, these original songs. All the illustrators are international. So I mentioned Marcos did Señorita Mariposa and How Many Squirrels Are in the World. There's a book called Lila Tov, Good Night, which is a lullaby. It's sort of a refugee immigration narrative with a wonderful artist from Israel. And a book called We'll Make Things Better Together with a woman who's from Thailand originally. And that matters to me a lot as well. Like, so these cross-cultural artistic collaborations, because I've been doing that with the music for many years, but now with the books as well. But to your point about what have I noticed about the differences, it's more like what I've noticed about the similarities, which is, that's what's really been fascinating. It's just like the same degree of energy, joy, with kids, but also by definition at our concerts or our book events, the kids are never there by themselves. They're there with their parents or their grandparents or their teachers. And there's been this, incredibly heartening, universal similarity to the response, which is just like joy and engagement and fun and curiosity.
That's awesome. One of the things, I just share this real quick with you. One of the things that I noticed when I was performing in my first or second tour in Puerto Rico, I used to do, before I get to this age of almost 100, do all sorts of pratfalls on stage. And here in the States, I'd fall off a chair and people would laugh. But down in Puerto Rico, I fell off a chair and all the kids laughed, and then they started to applaud. And I said, it was really caught me off guard. And it happened everywhere I went in Puerto Rico. And someone just explained, well, they just appreciate the art. And they recognize that that's a skill. And I'm like, great, it is a skill. And why don't people in the United States recognize that?
Yeah. Well, I would say that's great. I mean, yeah, there are these cultural differences for sure. And for me, part of it's been more like linguistic. Like with this song, How Many Squirrels Are in the World? We played this in England years ago, in London in a school. And I could tell it wasn't, kids kind of weren't responding in the way that this would be an example of a difference in a way that I was accustomed to. And then we learned that the British pronounce that word squirrels. So it's like just a different way of phrasing and my American accent and all that. So once we overcame that like the fundamental word of the song, we pronounced it differently. Yeah. We were all good because they have squirrels all over the place in England as well.
I'm curious, how and why did you make the transition from performing for grown-ups and being in bands, which is a dream for so many people, to becoming a kids entertainer?
When I was a kid, becoming sort of infatuated with musical artists and authors and sort of fantasizing about what that life might be like and aspiring to that. Like I started writing songs when I was about 9 and got my first guitar. And, a lot of my role models were these musicians who used their platform for something bigger than their music itself. And I was really inspired by that. Same with authors. But really musicians. And so I envisioned a life in music where I was making albums, touring, but also having some impact for like the greater good, for lack of a better way of putting it. And I hit a point in my career in the music business where I just wasn't feeling that was happening. And the industry itself, I was getting a little jaded on. It just seemed like a lot of it was like too cool for school and this hipster culture. And, I just wasn't feeling inspired by that. So the last touring band I had, we had sort of this dual identity. We would play in clubs and theaters and do the stuff that rock bands do. But we also had another entirely different identity called the Roots Music Collective, where we would go and do school assemblies. So sometimes we'd be out till 2 a.m. playing at a club, and at 8 the next morning would be under the fluorescent lights in the gym, doing our assembly on the roots of American music. And what I found over time was like those audiences, that's what I felt really moved by. And it was just the enthusiasm and the openness that those young children had to music. That touched me and reawakened with me that sort of curiosity and openness to music that I was losing hold of. So I actually went back and got a master's in education with the intention of getting out of the music business and becoming a classroom teacher. And I did that, really thinking I was leaving music as a profession behind. And when I was an elementary school teacher, I used to write songs for my kids. And it started off just like at fun for recess, or like the first Mr. G album was called Pizza for Breakfast, so like fun songs like that to make them laugh. But I also would write songs that were related to the curriculum. So things about like How Many Squirrels could be considered a book like that, like a counting book. We all need to learn how to count. And this how many squirrels are in the world, for lack of, there's a scientist, family cohesion element, nature observation, but it's also nuts and bolts like a counting book. So started writing songs that could be useful in the classroom or for kids to, remember math, how to do math, or something we were reading about, a book report, whatnot. Just because music, when it's catchy, is such a wonderful way to learn. Anyway, over time, I found myself back in the music business in an unexpected way, because like the parents of my elementary school students started asking me to play birthday parties for their kids, and we would do local coffee shops in Northampton, Massachusetts, where we're based. And just like a rock band, it sort of started to grow word of mouth. So we started to play around Massachusetts, then around New England. And next thing I knew, I wasn't a classroom teacher anymore. I was back to being a full-time touring musician and now an author. but with a much more rewarding life, like playing for parents and kids and teachers.
Yeah. You were mentioning that the music that I grew up with, that had a lot of, I don't know if meat on it is the right phrase, but it just had a lot of substance. It wasn't just, I need to get with a girl and I need to fall in love.
Exactly. Exactly. I couldn't agree more. And so, I wasn't resonating with that. And so it's by far not a planned trajectory, it's still a work in progress, but it's been full of unexpected, but like delightful surprises to find a way back to music in a way that feels more impactful and more aligned with my values.
Yeah. Hey, I have to ask, can you play a little bit of Señorita Mariposa?
Sure. Absolutely.
Señorita mariposa, tú eres muy hermosa. Señorita mariposa, tú eres muy hermosa. Te quiero a ti. Little butterfly, you just caught my eye. Little butterfly, flying through the sky. I'm so happy you're alive. Con tus alas preciosas, cuando te posas en la rosa. Your pretty orange wings, they make me wanna sing. Señorita mariposa, tú eres muy hermosa. Señorita mariposa, tú eres muy hermosa, te quiero a ti. Little butterfly, flying through the sky. I'm so happy you're alive.
Very good. Fantastic. Hey, I gotta ask, how did a guy from Philly who landed in central Massachusetts end up winning a Latin Grammy and performing all over Latin America?
Yeah, that's also an unexpected path. So when I was a kid, like 3 years old, I was asked what I wanted to be when I grew up, like lots of kids are. And I already knew the answer to that question. It was like I said, I want to be a musician and a baseball player. And in fact, those were long-standing passions. Obviously, the music, but I played baseball all through college. And when there was time, the reason I'm mentioning all this, when we came to junior high, 7th grade, in my school in Philadelphia, you had to choose either French or Spanish. Mm-hmm. And for me, that was an easy one. I didn't know anyone who spoke a word of Spanish, but I thought, I'll learn Spanish now, and then when I'm a Major League Baseball player, I'll be able to communicate with my teammates from Latin America. Mm-hmm. So, sure enough, I started taking Spanish. I loved the language, and kept up with it all through high school, did a semester in Spain in college, and traveled a lot in Latin America. But during that whole incarnation, when I was a singer-songwriter for grown-ups, it never occurred to me to write songs in Spanish. It was only when I sort of became Mr. G, and my wife and I were on our honeymoon in Colombia, and I was on the beach one day in this really remote jungle area called Parque Tayrona, and I brought my mandolin on the trip. And some kids came up to me. They were fascinated with what we were doing there and what was this instrument. So I wrote a song on the spot for them called Vamos a la Playa. There's actually a video of it on our YouTube channel, like filmed right on the spot. My wife had a camera. I wrote it and we just did it. And so I put, on that trip, I wrote several bilingual songs because I was just like playing on the street or meeting kids like that. We put them on the next Mr. G album. And people took a real interest in the bilingual music. And subsequently, we were traveling more in Mexico and Guatemala. I kept writing songs like that and never knowing there was something like that even existed, like a Latin Grammy Award for children's music. I had no idea. And so over time, the bilingual component, people took such an interest in it that I've started to fuse together my interest in Spanish with the music and the culture. with the nature component. One of our album that won the Latin Grammy is called Los Animales, the animals. So you can imagine what that's about. And there's one called Mundo Verde, Green World. So a lot of original bilingual songs with nature themes. So it's been an incredible journey that way.
That's fascinating. Well, I'm so happy that we've had a chance to talk about how many squirrels are in the world and so many other things. We should let people know where they can go to find out more about you, your books, and your music.
Thanks so much, Jed. So here's the thing. My website is mrgsongs.com, and that's all spelled out, M-I-S-T-E-R-G, Mr. G, all one word, Mr. G Songs. So MISTERGSONGS.com. But my actual given name is Ben Gundersheimer. Anyone want to try to spell that? Go for it. Good luck. But on the book jackets, it's Ben Gundersheimer and parentheses Mr. G. So you can find us in bookstores everywhere, but please visit the site. There are all sorts of great videos there, including the visit to visit the butterflies in Michoacan and playing the squirrel song and traveling all over the world.
Yeah. Well, we've had a really fun time speaking with and listening to Mr. G, Ben Gundersheimer. My friend, thank you so much for being with us, and please come back.
It's a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me. Have a great day, Jed.